They say the loneliest places don't announce danger. They sit quiet, patient, waiting for the wrong door to be left open. Calderon didn't believe in fate, but that evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and bled the valley into shadow, something was already moving toward him. Something that would change the shape of his solitude forever. Before we dive in, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Calderon rode into the yard just as the last light drained from the hills, leaving the land washed in a dull, cold grey. His mare breathed low beneath him, steam curling from her nostrils as she slowed near the hitch rail. Calder swung a stiff leg over the saddle, the familiar pull in his lower back reminding him of a long day, spent repairing fence wire and resetting posts that had leaned too long against the wind. This hour usually brought quiet, a deep, settling silence born of miles of open land and years of living alone with routine. He welcomed it. He took a single step toward the cabin before his jaw tightened. The door wasn't shut. It hung open by a few inches, pushed inward, rocking faintly as a draft slipped through. Calder stopped cold. That door never moved unless he moved it. He checked the latch every time he left. Every time, his stomach knotted as his eyes dropped to the ground. No clean tracks in the fading light. No churned dirt near the porch. Nothing out of place except the door itself. His fingers curled around the mare's reins, steady despite the slow creep of unease climbing his chest. Someone was inside, or had been. He moved closer, boots quiet against the earth, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Nothing. He reached the door and nudged it open with 2 fingers. The hinges gave a soft, complaining groan. Inside, the air carried the stale scent of smoke from a fire left untended. Weak coals glowed in the stove, casting a thin orange haze across the room. Calder stepped in, boots touching the floorboards as his gaze swept the corners. The table, the shadows beneath the bed. Then came a sound, barely more than a scrape, faint but wrong, from the corner near the stove. He turned toward it, breath held, muscles coiled to move, and then he saw her. An Apache woman sat curled on the floor, wrapped tight in one of his blankets. Her body was drawn inward, tense, ready to spring, but exhaustion dragged her shoulders down. Her head tipped forward as if holding it up had become work. Her long black hair clung damply to her skin, still wet from melted frost. The buckskin dress she wore was torn along the seams, split and frayed from hard travel, strips hanging where they shouldn't. Her bare legs were pulled close for warmth. Calder didn't move. Fear wasn't what stopped him. Confusion did. The moment didn't fit anything he understood, and surprise slowed his thoughts. His heartbeat climbed, but his breathing stayed measured. Her eyes lifted to him, dark and alert, fear sharp but controlled. She looked like someone who had run out of strength, but not dignity. "It was open," she whispered, her voice thin and rough. Calder took one step inside and closed the door behind him, sealing out the cold. His hand rested near his belt out of habit, not threat. He studied her the way he did wounded livestock or cornered riders. No assumptions, no sudden moves. "I see that," he said. She flinched at the sound, not at the tone, but at the certainty that she'd been found. He crouched near the stove, turning his back partly to her, a small risk meant to show he wasn't about to drag her out or pin her to the floor. He pushed the coals together and added a log. The embers caught, brightening, and the new flame washed the room with warmer light. Bruises showed along her arms. Faint marks traced her ribs. Her hands trembled as she tightened the blanket, trying to hide the torn dress beneath. Calder pretended not to see. His mind worked through reasons, threats, consequences. But the first thing he felt wasn't anger. It was concern. "You hurt anywhere?" he asked, eyes on the fire. "No," she said too fast. He heard the lie but didn't press. "Not yet," he said quietly. He stood, pulled off his gloves, set them on the table. His pulse slowed. The danger wasn't immediate. She wasn't armed. She wasn't aggressive. She was cold, exhausted, and scared. "The fire'll come back strong in a minute," he said. "You can stay there." She watched him like she was trying to read a language she didn't know. Men usually shouted, or demanded, or took. He stepped away instead. Her shoulders eased just a fraction. The room warmed. Calder leaned against the table and studied her again. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, like she'd run until her body nearly gave out, like she'd expected a worse kind of man to walk through that door. He wasn't that man, and something in her eyes shifted when she realized it. He let the quiet stretch, letting her choose the pace. Fear made people reckless when rushed. She shifted under the blanket, tugging it higher when the torn fabric showed. He cleared his throat and moved toward the shelf. "You eaten?" The question was plain, careful. She hesitated. "No," she said, guarded. He opened a tin of beans, poured them into a pot, set it near the stove. The smell filled the cabin, familiar and grounding. She watched his hands closely, reading him the way survivors always do. He dragged a chair near the stove, not to sit, but to show stillness. "You came far?" She nodded. "Yes." He didn't push. When the beans were ready, he filled a bowl and approached slowly, stopping short so she didn't feel trapped. "Here." Her hands shook as she took it. She ate carefully at first, then faster as hunger won. He turned his attention back to the fire, posture loose, breathing steady. When she finished, she whispered, "Thank you." "You're welcome," he replied. "You can rest there." She curled onto her side, exhaustion finally claiming her. Within moments, her breathing slowed, deep and even. Calder sat at the table and sharpened his knife, the scrape steady, grounding. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls. Inside, he kept watch as she slept, unsure why her presence felt less like an intrusion, and more like a responsibility he hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. Morning came quietly, not with birds or warmth, but with a thin grey light slipping through the cracks in the shutters, stretching across the cabin floor like cautious fingers. Calder woke stiff in his chair, his neck protesting as he shifted. The fire had burned low again, but enough heat lingered to keep the room from turning cruel. He looked toward the stove. Asha still slept there, curled inward, the blanket rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. Without the strain carved into her face, she looked younger, softer, though the bruises hadn't faded with rest. Calder stood carefully, every movement measured. He set the coffee pot on the stove, the faint clink of metal sharp in the quiet. Her eyes snapped open instantly. Fear surfaced before awareness. She pushed herself upright, gripping the blanket like it might shield her from whatever came next. Calder lifted one hand slightly. "Just coffee," he said. "That's all." Her breathing slowed, though her eyes stayed on him. "How long?" she asked. "Most of the night," he replied. "You needed it." She didn't argue. She sat at the table wrapped in the blanket, hands warming around the cup, steam fogging her face. After a long silence, she spoke. Her name was Asha. Her people had camped quietly, too quietly to deserve what came. Riders, demands, fear turning to violence. She had run when guns came up, when voices turned cruel. She hadn't stopped until her body refused to carry her further. Calder listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't soften the truth or harden it. When she finished, he said only, "You're safe here." The words weren't a promise made lightly. They were a decision. Snow drifted in by mid-morning. Calder checked the fence line and returned, uneasy about leaving her alone, but unwilling to cage her with concern. Inside, she cleaned, straightened, tried to reclaim usefulness the only way she knew how. He didn't stop her. When he came back, the cabin felt different. Lived in, but not invaded. "You did fine," he told her. Relief crossed her face like a passing shadow. By afternoon, the sky cleared. Asha stood at the door, the blanket folded neatly on the chair. She didn't belong to this place, and she knew it. "I can't stay," she said quietly. Calder nodded. He saddled the mare without ceremony and rode with her as far as the ridge, where the land opened wide and paths split toward uncertain futures. He gave her food, a knife, and directions toward a trading post 2 days east. "If you see trouble," he said, "don't stop running." She met his eyes, steady now. "You gave me more than shelter," she said. "You gave me a night where I wasn't hunted." They parted without touching. Calder watched until she disappeared into the land, then turned home alone. The cabin waited, door shut, latch secure. But the silence inside had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt like something had passed through and left a mark, not of loss, but of proof. Even in the loneliest places, mercy could still find a way in.